The interesting thing about the network horizon is not like, what's confusing to me is not how can we dig into the network horizon. It's like, if we have a concept of it when we start with a map, and we ask the right questions, there's a whole lot of ways we can unpack what's going on in the network horizon, which I'll explain in a moment, what I mean by that. But we can use, like, there's a whole, human systems dynamics has lots of tools for helping us unpack it. And if we've gathered the right data, sumApp and Kumu can make things visible or perceivable, that there just isn't another way to perceive them. So it's not like, how do we dig into the network horizon that I'm sort of most mystified by, but it's that we don't have, welcome, Marcia. Marcia, if you want to do a quick mic check, just if you're ready for that. Hi.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're just getting started, and I'm just sort of finding my words here as we go. I'm kind of winging it today because it's something that I tried to explore all week. I tried to get to some kind of structured thing that I could do over the weekend, and it just wasn't coming. So I just surrendered and said, I'm going to wing it. So thank you for that, Julie. So the thing about the network horizon, which Marcia, I have not defined what I mean by that yet, so I will in a moment. But the thing that's interesting to me about it, and sort of befuddling to me about it, is that it strikes me as the space. I mean, it's a space, and there's lots of spaces, but there has been a particular space that I have been sort of trying to move into, trying to articulate and trying to help people see through social system mapping, without it being super clear in my own mind exactly how to define what that is. I just know that what I usually come across, so we make a social system map and people look at it in terms of, you know, as a directory, or they look at the offers and asks, and there's this piece about the deep structures that are beyond what any one of us can see on our own. Like, I can't see it without a bunch of data. No one else can see it without a bunch of data, but we can see it if we gather the right data. And what I realized, so I was in this workshop and I heard a social network analysis guy just say the network horizon, say that phrase. And there's not much out there about that phrase. I think he got it from another different context and moved it over to an SNA context. But like, light bulbs went off in my head that is the thing, that the space that I have been trying to move people's minds into for quite a while now. And it's never been visible. It's not been something that we've had access to as human beings. And so we don't have, because it takes a bunch of data, it takes a bunch of, it takes the data visualization tool, it takes being able to have an interactive tool where people can create different, highlight things. And we just didn't have the technical tools, and we didn't have the capacity to gather the data for that. And so we didn't have a conception of it. And once I heard it, I was like, yes. And that's where I'm always trying to push people, but nobody wants, it's not that nobody wants to go there. Occasionally people go there spontaneously because they have their own sort of insight into that. But it's not something that generally most normal people have any curiosity about or desire to look at or sense of that this could be valuable to them. And it's also not something that you can just show in one shot and then suddenly everybody's the light bulbs go on and they go, oh, I get that, that's valuable. It's like, it actually, there's a skill set involved, and there's, the right kind of tool you have to make. And so that's kind of like, I had this aha moment, and I was like, but I still don't know how to talk about it in a way that helps people understand the value of it, or helps them be curious about it, or want to know more about it. So I'm still struggling with that, but that's enough yammering sort of about that. I'll explain what I mean by the network horizon. So if we think of a, or maybe I'll just pause and see if anybody wants to just comment on what I've said so far, because I've been just thoughts or what's curious to anyone. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, so you were talking before, you mentioned a phrase that kind of gelled this for you that somebody took from another context, but I missed the phrase itself. What was the phrase?
No, just the network horizon, just that.
Oh, the network horizon. Okay, that's the phrase. Okay,
Yeah.
I understand. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And
Okay.
when I did some Googling, because I was like, oh, I've never heard anybody in social network, you know, like in the circles I travel in, I've never heard anybody use that phrase, but it's a perfect phrase for this thing we can now see that we couldn't see before. And so I Googled it and I came across an academic paper that had to do with, and I didn't keep it because I just zoomed through things. And it was about they were referring to, it wasn't like a label for something, it was just they were referring to in an organization, what can the leaders in the organization understand about the network, the actual social networks within their organization. So it was like there's a horizon beyond which a leader can't see, which is, you know, they can see their team and they know how well their team works together. But beyond that, they don't know who their team is working with. They don't know the political dynamics of people beyond their team. And that was as much as I found. Like, it was just sort of a casual reference in this social network analysis paper about organizations.
What you just said, two ideas came to my head. And one is a network horizon a liminal space? And if it is, between what and what?
Yeah, this is what, so for me, when I heard that phrase, and like, it was like, oh, a light got shown on this space I've been trying to understand for quite a while. And once I looked at the space, I realized, oh, the reason this feels so important to me is because it's like the threshold between, okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. So Michael Quinn Patton, who's a egghead guy I know, likes to talk about how they've done research and they've realized that systemic transformation does not happen when, like, projects and organizations do not create systemic transformation. Projects and organizations, like, say you want to make education better, their projects are successful to the degree that they buffer and protect themselves from the broader education system. Like, the patterns in the broader education system are what make it as dysfunctional as it is. And the only way your project is going to be successful is if you isolate yourself from those patterns and block them somehow. So successful projects prove something different can work, but they don't actually impact the broader systems that they're part of, because they isolated themselves from that system. So they don't create system change, they create a successful project. And if there's a lot of them and they get enough publicity and over time people think differently, they can slowly change a system, but they in and of themselves are not actually, they're often, and often they sort of try to fly below the radar so they don't get sucked up into the broader system's negative patterns. So what they've come to is that projects and organizations don't create systemic transformation. Networks create systemic transformation because networks can amplify that shared learning from the projects and shared support, et cetera. Okay, so if projects don't create systemic transformation and networks have the potential to create systemic transformation, but networks, like how do networks, like what I see often in networks is that what networks become is flatter subsets of projects that don't do a whole lot of shared learning and communication across the projects.
What you're saying goes along with my second idea that I was mentioning, and that is, I think that in our systems and our networks, there's far more disorganized complexity than we are giving credit to, okay?
Mhm.
And that what happens is that in that disorganized complexity of everybody just moving around everywhere, we find islands of organized complexity, you know, what Jane Jacobs talked about and so forth.
Yep.
And we gravitate toward those organized
Yeah.
complexities, and those become the project. And
Right.
so what happens is that these islands become within the larger system, but they don't transform it. Instead, they start having an oscillating relationship.
Yep.
And everybody says, oh, we're winning, and then nothing happens. And then we're losing, winning, and nothing
Yep.
goes on. We don't reach the tipping point we need to
Yep.
do on a strong, wider. And
Yep.
that, then your network horizon is the place then where those organized things stop being projects, instead becoming an ecosystem, I guess is the best word I can think about it. And that transforms the system. But one of the things I started early in my thinking when I started approaching systems thinking is mostly what we're fighting against are entrenched systems, which are extremely, when we talk about resilience and we talk about robustness, we're usually thinking of it in positive terms, but systems that are detrimental can be just as robust and just as resilient, and they're better at it than we are, and they've been doing it longer.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. All of that. I agree with, I mean, that's what I've seen in, you know, the years I've been working with networks is a belief that these islands are the solution, and a sort of naivete about the impact of the broader systems, because where I am locally, things feel like really, really powerful and successful here. But if we can, what struck me as so important about the network horizon is that is the space, in my mind, at least, between those islands or those projects and actually developing a broader ecosystem that actually flows like an ecosystem and that actually has the potential to begin to shift the broader systems. So to me, it has felt more and more like that space that we can now actually, for the first time, begin to map and see into and see the deeper structures of what's going on and see, oh, this isn't an ecosystem. This is three, you know, little islands that have nothing to do with each other, even though there's the 3-4 people in the middle are totally involved with everybody and think that it's super connected when in fact, you know, that's just their perspective because of their position in it. So now we can start, or, you know, there's a whole lot of other things we can see now that we couldn't see before. And now that we can see them, we can interact with them wisely. We can like apply various HSD concepts or any kind of structured inquiry to what we can see beyond that network horizon. But it helps us get out of our own perception. So like, I see all this wonderful stuff happening, and so I think that's universal. But if I just step, you know, like 3 feet to the left, I realize, oh, it's not working like this. I'm just in my own viewpoint. And so, that's why it struck me as so important. And like I said, I have real clarity about, you know, how we can start to see those things now, assuming we ask the right questions. And so part of the struggle for me has been like, I've done all these maps with clients or, you know, with some, you know, pro bono maps, and I'm always saying, trying to push at the questions that have to do with power and the things that hold the status quo in place. And often I get pushback like, that's not necessary. Why would we map that? Who's going to use that? How are people going to interpret that? That feels, you know, like threatening or whatever. And so actually most of the maps I've designed don't have that in there. And I was just looking at our community practice map, and I was like, yeah, there's not a whole lot of deep structure here. Like there's some more questions we could be asking in our map. So even like if we don't have that insight of what's possible as we're designing the map, designing the data gathering, there's not so much we can do. And so just like beginning to get that insight about the value of that and what kind of questions that would require and what that would mean has been a thing I've been like, I have not landed on any kind of conclusions or. So that's what I wanted to posit. And so then I was thinking like a question then, if we were doing breakouts and we can just do it all together, is like for you, granted that what I just said was maybe not as articulate as it could have been because I'm just sort of thinking, but what about that resonates for you? And yeah, go ahead, Laura.
I want to come back because I don't think I'm quite clear on what do you mean with the network horizon yet.
Okay.
So maybe I'll just raise that as a question and hopefully this can maybe draw out some more information from you, but maybe also open a space where we then kind of reflect more on this topic. Because I'm kind of stuck with two things and I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding or if they're actually both involved or not at all. One is this image of the horizon, like literally, like if you're walking on a field, right, you have the horizon. So there's a point to which I can see, and then there's beyond the horizon, which I can't see. Yep. So that image I have in my mind, which would be in a network perspective, more like I know the people I know, and I know what they're working on and what their skills are, but then there's many things I don't know. They're beyond my own horizon. So then the network horizon would be, I guess, the individual perspective, but different for every person, but it would be the blind spots I have in the network, right? Yep. So that's the one like image or that I got with the network horizon. But then the other thing is, and I don't know if that's the horizon, like is the horizon more this limit of my individual perspective, or is if you talk about horizon, do you mean what's beyond my limit? Which is like, further away in the landscape kind of to stay in that image, which would then be maybe the more deeper structures, the things around power, maybe the gaps in connection or collaboration or exchange of information that we don't even know that they're there.
Yeah.
But once we start exploring that, we actually tap into this potential where the network could become much more of a functional ecosystem style network.
Yep.
So
I'm going to respond.
When you talk about the horizon, is it the limit point and the personal perspective or the space beyond that? Yeah. So I'm that's the two takeaways I have so far from your sharing.
Yeah. Well, if you think of a horizon, right, things are clear, like for the first mile, right? But then they get fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier. So there isn't, with the horizon, there isn't an actual line. It feels like if we're looking that way, and we're looking at at an ocean, we can see a differentiation between the sky and the water, right? But there isn't actually a line there. It's just our ability to perceive gets less and less and less the further and further away. So in one sense, I feel like it's just like there comes a point when we just don't, there's a whole lot of stuff we don't know. I mean, beyond which we just don't know. And so the network horizon is not a point, for one thing. It's not a line. It's just like means that space beyond our ability to perceive. So that's one piece of it.
So it moves with us, right? Like
right. So it moves with us.
On a ship on the ocean, we keep sailing.
Yeah. And it moves.
We never reach that point, right?
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And in a network, it's sort of like the way I'm thinking about it, it's sort of like the collective horizon of the people at the core, like because they're connected. And so I can show up in a meeting like this and say, who knows X about Y, or who knows who's doing what. And collectively, my horizon is a little further out because I have you guys in it with me, even though I personally, so like often people will say to me, we don't need a map because we know we know everything about this, we know everybody. And it's like, well, no, there's 5 of you at the core who are very connected to all the influencers, and you feel like you know everything and you believe you know everything. And it is a bigger knowing than any one of you individually. And since you are all close, you have access to that knowing from each other. But that doesn't mean you know everything. I mean, there's like whole communities out there who are impacted by your decisions, or who are you know, who could help you make better decisions, who you're not aware of. So it's sort of like a mushy, fuzzy thing of both. It moves, it's somewhat collective, but around a core of influencers, and that because there's a few of them, they feel like I can see very far. I have access to information very far. But if you actually break it down, they still don't know who's doing what, who's like, there's a whole lot they just don't know. So yeah, but it feels like that space of what's either very fuzzy or past what you can see is and the challenge is I find a lot of people aren't interested in that because they don't have that as a like if you look at the horizon and we didn't have geographical maps, we just wouldn't have it. Like some people would be like, I want to find out what's over there. Like I want to just start walking. But most people would be like, oh, whatever. I can't see anything there. I'm going to just go back to my daily life. And I feel like with the network horizon, most people are in that, like, if I can't see it.
They're so occupied with everything they're doing and the tasks and the projects and the people they know.
Yeah.
There's no much interest or capacity to take some funny exploration, to go somewhere you don't see, to find something you don't know.
Right. I'm just going to add one more thing and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys respond to my questions. But I feel like, so we have we have the things we know, the things that are within our network horizon are very engaging and very consuming and very occupying and very exciting. And so we're in that space. And then we have this concept of systems, like these big systems out there that are destroying our lives. And we want to fight those systems and we want to change those systems. But there's this big gap between what we're doing here and those systems. I mean, we like conceptualize the systems as separate, like as far away or as these big monoliths that we can't impact. But in fact, I believe it's in that network horizon space that we actually can connect up the project that I'm working on and the big systems that I want to change is in that network horizon, because the system is nothing but the people in it creating patterns. And so the further we dig, the further we venture into the network horizon and work to shift patterns at that scale, the more we'll be able to impact the system. So it's like action at the network level, not just, yeah, okay. And I'm gonna stop now. And I wanna do one thing though. I've noticed in our things that those of us who know each other fairly well tend to feel comfortable jumping in. And I want to make sure that, so I'm going to propose that we sort of try to, I don't want to do a circle and call on people because I don't like to be called on when people call on me. I mean, I like to speak when I'm ready to speak, but I want to just say, if we've already spoken once, let's wait and just give space to the people who haven't and give more space than we're comfortable normally with, so that I want to start to sort of ask us all to do this in all of our sessions so that it doesn't turn into me conversing with two people and everybody else watching, because I don't like when that happens. So when I'm a participant. So I just want to pause. And so the questions I have are, what of this resonates, and how might being able to perceive into that network, just anything that's resonating for you right now are questions. And pausing to hear from the ones we haven't heard from.
Good morning.
Good morning, Joe.
Good morning.
My coffee is kicking in finally. I had been working for over 3 hours now, but coffee is the latest news. One of the things that Christine, as you were talking, that I was thinking about is this alignment that we lack in our next immediate steps, and that network horizon you're talking about, that, you know, what I miss in the work that I would want to do is, how do we align these short-term adaptive shifts to the long-term game that we want to play, right? We don't necessarily know where we are heading, what's in the way, what challenges, what mountains, what rivers we need to cross, and all of those. But at least we know which direction we would want to go and things like that. At least we would want to start there and also know that is that the right direction. And the reason I'm bringing that analogy back is there is power and there is influence. And then there are systems, right? Like those three are like the three triangles, if you would want to. Power lies with the individual, influence lies within the relationship aspect of it, and the systems are, you know, everything that's outside control, basically. So that triangle needs to make sense, triangle, intersection, 3D, whatever we want to call it, right? And for that to work, the alignment between the, as I said, the short-term adaptive shifts and the long-term. So in social systems mapping, I'm more interested in that alignment, in showing that alignment, in gradual revolution of the map to make us see the next tiny bit of network horizon with all the foggy and the snow and mountains and terrains and depth, sea level, whatever, that small steps. At the same time, take it to another level of scale, as if multiple factors coming into, so we can see, oh, is this the direction? Is this the plane at like 35,000 feet view, or 60,000 or 100,000? Yeah. So that's my interest and my longing to see that adaptability be in place. And I'm not saying like it's a tools thing. I'm saying it is as a thinking aspect, like we as thinkers, systems thinkers or social systems thinkers need to think about what's that tiniest adaptive shift that we can use the tool to reveal itself, reveal the network, right? For the network horizon to be revealed, all the environmental factors need to get out of the way, right? The fogginess and the light needs to be there. And so then traversing the terrain makes more joyful ride. Did I say enjoyable? Oh,
Enjoyable, Joe.
yeah, enjoyable, right? Like making Joe able to be joyful. Never mind.
Yeah.
That's my coffee shot of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Happy to hear from someone who hasn't spoken. Not a pressure though. Just give it a moment.
I'm sort of thinking in terms of data, that the maps need to be really useful. And so that data needs to be there. And then there's this other part that we're talking about. And I'm also thinking about, you know, the landing on the moon and that picture of the Earth, and maybe we need a lot of different perspectives to be coming into our map of sort of witnesses in a way, like the trip to the moon and being able to see from a distance, and explorers who are constantly moving beyond what they can see. And then I'm not speaking coherently in terms of all the thoughts coming to me. Then lately I've been part, or have seen a series on trauma and how traumas, our structures are built on trauma. So how we so how do we collect data that allows us to that we aren't, which is what you're bringing, that we aren't constantly reinforcing what we want to see, that we're asking questions about what isn't known, and yeah, the long term rather than the short term. And but it, you know, if we think about inquiry, you know, that our maps should be trying to answer questions we have, or stories, or maps as stories, then it sort of brings us to, you know, the questions. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like the mapping we're doing now, we're going from a flat map to maybe a Google type of map that's more active and interactive. But how do we move to the next level, which I think is more a living system, acknowledges sort of our bodies and the body of the earth. So what would I guess more inquiry into the bodies and structures of who we are as the next horizon, maybe, I don't know.
Thanks. Sorry. Other thoughts?
I just wanted to second and big heart to what Mary had pointed out. I think trauma has informed or shaped how we got here as human beings, as societies, and a curiosity-based inquiry into that is going to take us much longer, much farther, much inclusive, and in more healing ways than ignoring that. So definitely for that.
Yep. Yep. Julie, welcome.
Hello. It's about 4 p.m. here, so I'm cooking tea as well as listening to this with a lot of interest, and I'm frantically making notes and drawing my own map. But as an outsider, what I get from what you've been saying so far is that there's lots of really good projects, both in the UK and everywhere else, that are trying really hard and succeeding in some ways. And those are not able to advocate for themselves. So it's almost as though you've got a lot of little islands. We've got some fantastic projects, but instead of moving the islands, we need to be bringing tourists, if you like, in from those big broken systems, so that they can see what's working and what's possible. So I've drawn myself a little boat on the horizon with with someone with a loud hailer saying, look over here. So that's what I've got from it so far, and I'm finding it really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks for that.
I just want to say I'm kind of a lurker here. I tuned in today to just get like a little bit of stimulation because I work as an independent evaluator and I mostly work alone. So occasionally I need to hear from other people because of the isolation, but I really like everything that I've heard, and a lot of the network maps that I see, they're about projects. And so there's a lot of congratulation about, oh, look, we've moved from, we moved from, this kind of network to like, oh, we're all connected and all that. And it's, yeah, that's great, fantastic for your project. But in terms of any kind of transformation, it's, yeah, it isn't necessarily getting there. So that's really resonated with me about that. And I've kind of put in the chat some of my other comments about how what others have said have sparked interest. And I'm also taking notes on the side here. So thanks for all of this.
Yeah. And thanks for, I often do things just so I can lurk, and because I just want to hear how other people are thinking about things, or sometimes it's just I want to see how they're handling the process, like the event, the process, whatever. But I love it that you're still talking with us while lurking. So, and as an evaluator, I just value your perspective. So thanks. Yeah.
My project's fiscal sponsor is Earth Island Institute, which has over 60 projects across the world. So this conversation is sort of inspiring me to think more about what a map. I shared my maps with some of the staff there several years ago, and one of the associates started mapping the projects, but it never took off because of the sort of limited thinking around it, like what does the map do sort of questions. But it seems like it'd be a worthy project in the context of this conversation, to think about mapping those projects.
Yeah. One of the things I think about is, so one of the things that feels to me like it would be very valuable to map, because in HSD, we understand that the differences are the things that the tensions are where the energy is. The tensions are where the transformational potential in a system is. And in networks, there's this sort of constant drive to think we're all in love with each other and on the same page, and we're all united, and the unitedness is valuable and important and crucial, but being able to understand the tensions in the system is often a much harder thing to get at. And we don't always know that when we first start mapping. So, we start mapping and we think we know the dimensions that we want to look at, but it's as we be in the network that we start to sense, oh, these people are kind of, they're in a who knows there's a framework of strategies, change strategies like reimagine, resist, recreate, those. You're muted, Joe. I can see your.
Yeah, I think recreate and rebuild, or recreate and readapt, or something like that.
There's one is creating, one is resisting, one is revising sort of, and one is reimagining. So there's it's this whole scale of very, how big does it get and how hands-on does it get or abstract does it get? But, that's often a tension where some, there are people in the network who are all about resisting and then other people who are all about reimagining, and to be able to sort of map that out and start to look at that consciously and figure out how those different deep strategies can support each other rather than continually trying to pull apart. But that's, yeah. I mean, and it feels to me like even being able to see that is not just about seeing it, but about learning about systems. Like that's how we can begin, in situ, in our own context, begin to actually help people within the network understand how change really happens, as opposed to our theories about change, which are, often limited to doing things in the scope we can see. So, yeah.
I wanted to respond earlier. So I think even before getting into the business of creating the map, there needs to be an intentional setup of why in the hell are we using this map?
Yeah.
And sorry for my language.
No.
First word of the day. But why are we even putting effort? What is the map supposed to reveal?
Yeah.
And that's the intention setting, right? And then getting into the map to ask the right questions and be in the inquiry, as Mary was talking about. Also adding to what Christine, you're saying, the tensions, holding those tensions in HSD language are called interdependent pairs, right? Mm-hmm. And we can have 3 or 4 interdependent pairs where we are tweaking something or the other on that pair list, doing experiments and sense into the systems, probe into the systems, how they are responding. So what if we asked this question, how do people respond to that question? And based on those responses, tweak something else and see where what is shifting. Now, are their conversations different? Are they now creating better, new, meaningful, intentional relationships? Or are they getting into, I will say 6 years ago, I did my implicit bias, and this is a story space. 1 minute promise, 1 minute of story. I did my implicit bias and from Harvard test, and I quickly figured out that I was so deep in my Indianness, my community was built around Indians. And that's how I created my environment. And I lost, I didn't have collaborations and all of this. At work, yes, of course, I had all types of people that I was working with. But I didn't have African-American friends, or I didn't have people from Southeast Asia other than all Indians. And I was predominantly eating Indian food and all these things because of my upbringing, because of how my marital relationship shaped the way that we created community around us, right? That gave me such a different perspective into, man, if I was really a design thinker and facilitator, I needed to bring diverse cultures into my own understanding. Just an example of how asking questions and going through biases, and the map can help us reveal those biases by asking those questions around that.
Yeah.
How are your collaborators? Are you focusing on like-minded skills or diverse skills? Are you listening to diverse perspectives, different cultures, and things like that? Yeah. Yeah. Coffee has finally kicked in. Yay.
Yay. Yeah, so just even the asking of the questions is an intervention, is kind of what you're saying, is just asking questions makes us think and see that things that we might not have seen otherwise if we weren't faced with those questions. So a map, just making it in the beginning is an intervention, but then how do we continue to get the most out of that intervention, and how do we continue to use it for that sort of adaptive action that Joe's talking about in inquiry. So Brian, I wanted to respond, you were talking about the stable tension and unstable tension, and the stable tension we try to resolve, and the second we try to get away from. And it looks to me frequently in networks, like there are some stable tensions that we will stay in a network. So if a network is a voluntary space, like no one's forcing you to be there, your life is not dependent on it, you're not going to lose a whole hell of a lot if you leave that space, then it makes it very hard, like tensions become very hard to resolve because there's no pressure to stay in it. And so it feels to me like I leave, there's lots of groups I leave because of the tensions, because they don't, I don't feel good in them for whatever reason, or I don't feel aligned with them for whatever reason. And often that's just a fine thing because we have to be strategic and we have to limit our involvement. But sometimes I leave a group that I don't want to leave because it feels like I should be able to be, it should be a productive relationship, but it's not because of the tensions. And I don't bring them up because that's not the culture. And so even just being able to think about it, even if we can't resolve them, if we can at least begin to admit that happens, and that there are times when lots of times resolving them isn't the best thing. It's not the best use of anybody's energy. But when it is, if we don't have a way of starting to see that those tensions are pulling us apart or dissolving, making this whole big exciting project start to disperse because the tensions have built up, and we just now, sometimes that's appropriate and organic, and sometimes it's too bad. So
the example that I was thinking about had to do, and I was working on this morning before I came with you guys, is nitrogen flows in the state of California, and how that as a pollution problem is a particular problem compared to a lot of other places in the world. And what's happening is because it's such a complex problem, and because it's being basically a problem with rural communities, it's being ignored. I mean, we're updating our plans for climate change, but as far as nitrogen and nitrogen going into water, we haven't done anything since like 2016. It's really way behind. But it's not a problem that's concerning most people. But because, and I think this is what you were just saying, is that those groups that are supposed to be addressing it, it's like, well, this is just too complicated, or just actually too complex. Let's not bother with it because nobody we care about is really being affected by it. But that is going to fall apart later on, okay? So it's like the two, that there's an internal tension, which we don't want to mess with, and there's an external tension going on all at the same time. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. Those external tensions, I think we totally leave out of our maps, but that's kind of like, Joe, when you're talking about the landscape and the mountains and the oceans, like if we don't know there's an ocean in our path, we will not be prepared to cross an ocean, and we'll get to the edge of the water and we'll go, oh, I guess we're done. We haven't done what we needed to do, or a mountain or whatever. But if we know that that's out, those external tensions are there, then we can say, okay, we got to build a ship, I got to bring my climbing gear or whatever.
I do want to add one more thing that comes, like in network, there are different roles, different responsibilities, different heart spaces. I want to especially talk about heart spaces, like people who have intentions of doing something with the network. And one thing as systems thinkers from the past, or at least in the old colonized way of thinking, systems thinking, is we've not made space for health and healing and trauma and things like that. It's essential. I mean, when the tensions are there, there are boundaries. There are certain tensions that you stay with,
Yeah.
And then there are certain tensions you absolutely need to resolve for the health of the system, health of the network, health of the relationship, health of human beings in that system.
Yep.
And somebody needs to own that.
Yeah.
And highlighting that, and I feel like, trauma-informed leadership is a thing. Trauma-informed network mapping is a thing, because we as human beings are not being responsible in the way that we create our future. And I'm talking as a majority voice, right? So for others who leave those are the patterns that need to be observed. Who is leaving the system? Why are they leaving the system? Why are they leaving the network? What kind of conversations are happening that are not beneficial? And I'm especially passionate about this today, because we are dealing with such a conversation in GRC where like the extractive practices have been employed and 700 members have been spammed for a promotional thing by a member, and not once. And it's free volunteer space and things like that. It's just not healthy.
Yeah.
And it's been happening for over 3 months, and nobody's taking action. And we've finally decided that it's our role to do it. So it would not have been revealed if we didn't have that intention to do that. Somebody has to take responsibility. That's why I like HSD, is because of that responsibility, courage to step into action, to do something about it.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I can share something that stuck with me from an interview I once heard with Meg Wheatley. She's also a system thinker. Probably many of you know her. And she talked about that based on her work, we can't change systems. Because systems are emergent properties of, people, for example, coming together. And it's more than the individuals. It's also more than just the people coming together. It's something that emerges once the people come together and emerge. So a system is something emerging, which you can't unemerge. Like you can't turn it back and go all the steps back, because it's not a linear process of steps that were taken. So there's also no way of undoing it and then changing the system. And that for me just opened up a really interesting space, because I think in many conversations around system change, there still is understanding of, if you find the right intervention points and leverages and, you use the power in the right ways and whatnot and have enough resources, then we can change the system. And then based on that conversation, I was like, what if she's right and we actually can't? And then of course that poses the question, okay, how does change happen then? And what she put there is like, it happens because we create new systems. So people, again, maybe change some things individually in their relationships, in the way that they come together. And then that has then different emergent properties that create systems. So that's something that's alive for me. And I can almost feel it, like as I'm participating in this call, in this conversation, I can almost feel it like I'm walking in a space and there are like numb spaces, or like where I reach a point where I don't see, or I don't feel, or I don't know what's there. So this is for me a really central experience as part of this conversation. Like listening to you and the different topics where we feel like we're like walking in the fog, and then at some point it's like, okay, there's something in there, like I can't reach, or I can't touch, or I can't move beyond, and I don't know what it is. So I can turn around and I take some other small steps. So I feel myself moving with like these tiny steps in a space that's really hard to perceive. So it's really fascinating. And the last piece I just share, and I'll stop, is it definitely also made me think about the complexity of individual and collective patterns that are not just kind of external social patterns, but also the more internal, subtle ones that we have as humans. And I think that's a huge part of trying to create any kind of difference or change or more healthy, functional relationships, collaborations, efforts in any area really. Of course, linked to the whole piece around trauma and many of those other topics that go more into these subtle areas. But I also felt for myself, like in my life, I had moments where my horizon for these things expanded. And it showed me things I had no idea were there, but they were there all along.
Yeah.
I only realized after a certain expansion of the horizon, right? But it changes everything.
Yeah.
Kind of like, then these kind of insight can change even the past.
Yeah.
Because of how I look at it and relate to it. So maybe that is also a way that change can happen. If we have these kind of insights, that it can change what's possible for us today, but even what happened in the past.
Yeah. I want to pause here. I know if people have more they want to say. It's the top of the hour. And so we usually, and we'll do this today, we usually have an extra half an hour to just continue that. If usually the hour is a little more structured, and then we have a very informal, unstructured post hour, half an hour, which is optional. And so I want to just, those of you who need to jump off because it's the top of the hour, we have a little goodbye ritual that we'll do for you if you're leaving, and the rest of you, if you have more you want to talk about, feel free to stick around. Everybody's welcome to stick around for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or the whole half hour, whatever works for you. But if you need to go, let's all unmute and we'll do our little goodbye ritual, which is I'm just going to count down, and when I get to 1, we all give each other our blessings and our greetings for the rest of your day or evening. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful to have you.
I hope to see you again.
Cycle.
Yes.
Enjoy the new cycle. I will be dropping off.
Okay.
See you soon.
Thanks. Bye. Bye, Joe.
Bye.
Okay. Are you going, Brian?
Yes, please. What Laura was saying reminded me a lot about what you and Kara sent me for HSD, all that information, which I've been going through, trying to learn up. And one of the things they came up with was the landscape diagram, which is, I remember, it goes from stable to emergent to unstable because it's going for 2 different lines. But it seems to me that what really happens through process logic is that we go from stable to unstable to emergent.
Yeah.
Last 2 around, okay? And so it's the unstable place where we can start looking at. But unfortunately, stable oftentimes means what I said before, either entrenched or what is, already in place. And it's hard getting away from that stable into unstable, which is scary, and then going into emergent, which we're really scary because we have no idea where we're going to end up. That's where the horizon is, I think, between the unstable and the emergent, maybe. So that's actually, so Laura helped me kind of get that in my head. Yeah.
Laura, I wanted to comment on HSD actually. So in HSD, we talk about 3 kinds of change, and there's stable change, dynamic change, and then dynamical or complex change. And they have different impetuses. And often, in dynamical change, they're within some kind of closed context, not like super closed, but something that's within a container where things are being held together. Tensions build up, and then there's really rapid change. And so I'm not doing it justice, but I'm just saying that what Meg Wheatley was, like one of the big gurus to me 20 years ago, and was my introduction to all of this. And I agree. I mean, we can't change a system if we approach a system like it's a thing that can undergo stable change, because that's just not going to happen. But what we can do is also set conditions. So we can make new systems, but we can also set conditions for new things to emerge within systems. But that does mean moving far more into the unknown and far more into the Brian, that landscape diagram. One axis is agreement and one axis is knowing how it's done. And so, yeah, and that goes up into the, yeah, all of this is coming together anyway. Yeah. And so that's the other piece that I'm always thinking about, Laura, in terms of like, yes, we can't change systems, but what are the conditions that we can change? Because the conditions impact the system. And that's part of, like, to me, the network horizon is so that we can start to see into them wisely rather than just try to collapse them. I'm not making much sense, but I appreciate your description of the walking and the experience of walking at the moment. It feels very familiar and very like, that's what is generative, is just to take that walk and keep sensing into those spaces. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Christine, what is the third kind of change?
Well, okay. And the thing is, in truth, they're all abstractions of reality. They're not real. I mean, in reality, everything is complex change or dynamical change, but people approach, there's static change, which is just, you know, the box is closed, we pull up the flaps and now the box is open. That's just like point A and point B. And then there's dynamic change, which is the model that people often try to use in organizations of, we have a plan, there's a bunch of steps, we will go through these steps, and we can sort of intend to land at a certain place. We know where we're going to go. Like, there's a box, I just made this metaphor up, I'm playing with it all of a sudden. You know, I open flap A, flap B, flap C, flap D, and now the box is open. But I, you know, like I understood that as a sequence of events that I could intend and work through. And then there's, Glenda used to call it dynamical change, but sometimes she calls it complex change, given the you know, like if the dynamical is too sciencey a word. But so then you could say dynamical change is like, there's something in the box that wants to get out and it just pops it open. Like, we didn't know that, we didn't plan it, we didn't do it, just, it's like the tension breaks. Like an avalanche is dynamical change. Or an earthquake is dynamical change. It seems still, it seems like nothing is happening, but the tensions, the internal tensions are building up, and finally something, you know, we have this big shift that, and so that's, in systems, that's what causes systemic collapse or, you know, big shifts. I mean, yeah, like George Floyd was just, that was a dynamical change. It's not like that was anything new and different. It was just like the last straw, and suddenly like all these things rippled out from that.
So what's the third?
No, the third is the middle one. The dynamic change, where I open, I have an action plan with, so with the middle one, we're trying to do an intentional thing. We're like thinking we can plan and thinking that we can see, and in certain contexts, we can see the path. We can, you know, build a blueprint of a house and build the house, and we can do that. That's an organized sequence of actions that will create that change. So we can intend that change, we can plan that change. But the more complex the system, the less we can control the change. So like with complex change, we can't control that. Often we can't even, you know, sometimes we can predict it if we're, you know, have the right you know, measurements. But like with George Floyd, nobody knew when that would happen. A lot of people could predict eventually this is going to happen, but they couldn't make it happen, and they couldn't prevent it from happening, and they couldn't control how or where it happened. It's just something breaks, something shifts, and then and so the more complex the system, the more likely you're gonna have to be prepared for and deal with and sense into the potential for complex change. Laura, did that? Go ahead.
Like a movement moment.
Yeah. But movements can spend decades working and achieving very little, right? Like, but then sometimes, so then the external tensions, so like Brian talked about the external tensions, so like there's the internal tensions of everybody trying to get there, trying to make this change, and then some kind of external tensions, like the tension is building up, maybe internal to external, just sort of pushes it over the edge. And movements don't know when that will happen. I mean, they can't really make that. I mean, there's things they can do to influence it, but they can't make that event happen.
Well, in some ways, I think what's happening now with just all the work around trauma and racism as being really ingrained in our bodies and our structures, it's sort of a new moment where we're moving beyond what we've been talking about to something really fundamental.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that, how mapping, yeah, mapping for me has always been connected to wholeness. But there's, how can it, how can it be part of this deeper picture? Which is, I think what you're talking about this morning, I was just thinking in a very physical way of the landscape, but we're all standing on the earth, no matter where we are, but we're looking in a very limited space, that network landscape.
Yeah, Brian.
I'm not going to get to the depths that Mary was talking about, but a thought that came to my mind was the political landscape in America right now between the GOP and the Democrats, or between conservatives and liberal. And what it seems to me is that with the liberals, you're seeing, using the iceberg model, you're seeing new patterns emerging, coming out, okay? But unfortunately, the GOP has got the systemic structure already in place and has for a while. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party is kind of like ignored them, enabling them to do more. And so now you have the patterns and the structures are kind of heading each other. And a lot of times the liberals, especially the progressive, don't want to create the structures themselves. They just want the structures to change, and they're not going to be able to do that unless they start have something to replace it. So, and I think then you have to go to where Mary's talking about, to that deeper level, which we oftentimes don't go in order to make the changes on both system and pattern levels. We need to change the mental models.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is the mental models. I mean, ultimately, it's the mental models that shift. And that's like, when I first started doing, in the beginning, it was, we were just doing network mapping. And I'm a person, so me personally, have a history of a lot of trauma, a lot of chaos in adverse childhood stuff, right? And so for me, connection, like personal connection, is a nice theory, but not something I still struggle with it. So it's not like a thing that I really thought about, or, I mean, I was just always very self-reliant, and I was always just very like, I'm the boss of me, and I'm going to take care of my own self, and I'm going to make sure what I want to have happen happens. And that was that. And then we started doing social network analysis, coming out of a lot of various, just that's what happened. And I started to look at maps, like I'd see maps and I'd realize, okay, like there's this person I don't like, right? Like, I don't like this person, bugs me, but this person collaborates a lot with all these people that I love. So I'd be like, oh, well, I better treat her nice anyway. Like, I better not be a jerk to her, because then she'll tell like Michael that I'm a jerk and so that I'm a jerk. And then I'll have a bad reputation and people will see me poorly. And so, I mean, that was a very self-serving, very superficial, very sort of obnoxious thing, but it did change my mind. And it made me, I mean, it did make me start to see networks, like connections, like relationships differently. And then I started to think more about it, and I started to pay more attention to not just like who knows who in that way, but like I started to feel like, well, any space I show up in, I have to be careful. I have to take care of people because they're connected to this other person that I care about. And I'm not saying I'm good at it, but it changed my thinking about, like, if we're all connected, then how I relate to people actually makes a difference, which was not a thing that I ever cared about. I just was like, if people are a jerk to me, I'm going to be a jerk to them, and I'm going to dismiss that person because they're not relevant. And, like I was, that's just the way I was, and it didn't give it a lot of thought. But then I started to realize, oh, I needed to change that. And so I started to change that. But even that much to me, like, that was a very superficial, but even that much to me, it was like, oh, I see, it's changing my mind. It's changing how I think. And it's not changing how I think. I mean, it's changing it in the direction that I've been into complexity and all that stuff for, 10 years already. But it was like, that was all still, there's a layer of abstraction that actually being able to see a map made it come into my reality much more clearly. And then the more dimensions that we add to maps, it just helps me, like, it changes my mind more and more deeply, not in an abstract way. Like, I already have the beliefs, I already have the knowledge, but like the actual in my being shift. A map actually helps, even if it's really limited. So, Brian, yes, you're muted.
Does that mean that it's necessary to put a great deal of energy, there's a great deal of energy into that map just to keep those connections going, regardless of anything else that the map is supposed to do, is going to do? That you have to some form of energy, keeping all those connections kind of gelled together. Because I'm like you. I mean, I'm not much into social relationships. I want to know I want some kind of infrastructure underneath the system that connects everything together, that I don't have to constantly put energy into, that I can come back to and say, okay, fine, this is where we're going to move from here to myself, maybe, but I don't want to have the system itself having to take energy up just to maintain itself, because then it doesn't really go and transform the system itself. I'm saying that roughly, but that's kind of like what on my mind.
Yeah, and so you sort of froze up in some places. So in some of those places that we were just getting reverberation.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I think it's just really an emergent thing. I mean, so like, part of what I'm saying is, even just like seeing a couple maps and actually thinking about them made me start to think differently about how I show up. Mm-hmm. And the maps could go away. They don't have to stay. I mean, like, just, they were one-time things. Like, I've seen examples of just like a one-time shot map actually helping a person or two shift their thinking. That's a different, I mean, but so how do we go from just that teeny tiny scratching the surface to deeper and deeper? The more we can have on the map and the more alive it is, I think the deeper we can go with it. But just even visualizing something that we couldn't previously visualize. I mean, I think we learn visually in a different way than we learn with language. And so, I mean, it just feels like it's all useful. It's just a matter of, I'm always trying to push it to more useful and deeper use. But, and I don't always, like Laura, I'm just like, sort of like, this feels.
Well, I think somebody, I forgot who, but was talking about of roles and networks. And I think this quality of exploration also with this image of the network horizon is really essential. And anybody who, and that might not be so many, but anybody who feels drawn to it, I think can be a real, like other roles also, like maybe people who focus more on the connections and have like,
Yeah.
you know, like an innate joy and affinity with connection weaving. Same with people that maybe are always like, what's next? Like, what's over there? I can't see, but I'm so curious.
Yeah.
I think this is all really valuable. And the same in ecosystems, you know, like different animals and plants and beings have very different natures and different activities that they do. So yeah, I think that's already a really important piece. I think if we realize that what you also said before, Christine, like all systems are made up of people, whether it's old systems, new systems we like or want to change or whatnot, but they're all people in it. And so if we as the people, you know, for example, explore things and find ways to make that visible or experiential or share it in some capacity, that's like one of the small things that I can sense. And I also have the sense, and I'm not sure if this is just a funny story in my mind, but I have the sense that there's beyond individuals, let's say curiosity, to put it in one word, to explore, that there's something like an evolutionary force, I put it in that term, that's also driving this, that's kind of pulling on the other side of it, right? Like some people are the most curious exploratory ones, and they are maybe, you know, on the furthest line out as far as one can go with this horizon. But then there's like another force on the other side that's like, come on, there's more, come on. That's sometimes the sense that I get. And the other two things that just came to me was definitely like interconnections.
Yeah.
I think this is just, I mean, yeah, like in the more, you know, like older systems thinking, you know, from decades ago, there was like still such a focus on that. And I also feel now, and in the conversation today, I come back also to interconnection or to connectivity in many ways. And the other thing that struck me was openness, and how openness can maybe also be like a, I don't know, supportive quality in this whole process. To maybe see things in a different way, or think or experience or relate. There's some connection to my openness in the whole process, and then how I'm interacting. And I feel many times, yeah, maybe what someone was saying, like our bias or our backgrounds or our trauma creates these, you know, blinders that reduces openness and reduces what we can see, right? Because then there's pain there, so I'm not going there. And there's like something that's different, so I'm not going there. And there's somebody I don't like, so I'm not going there. And then it's like this has more of this contraction quality, right? And opening up also lets then different experiences, identities, patterns, relationships, even it become possible for one, right? And then maybe actually like emerge or manifest in some way. So yeah, I kind of got to openness as well.
Yeah. And that's one of the, I mean, this is not the context you're referring to it in, but with the HSD, you know, like with their methods, it's really just like a bunch of ways of helping open your mind or helping you see, you know, inquire. I mean, inquiry is openness, right? Like answers are closed at a real fundamental level, but inquiry is an opening and helping us just start to look from different angles and from different perspectives than our usual mental models, like just to get outside of that, our blinders, which is that's, it just has seemed really magical to me to start to apply those to a map, like those structure, those disciplined inquiries to a map. And then the map is also a disciplined inquiry into the social system. And then just to increase our openness.
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of people, especially people, the kinds of people who are like Brian, attracted to maps and attracted to logic and thinking structures and sort of those kinds of things, which have a certain, there's a certain personality type and a certain culture that is drawn to abstractions as opposed to deep connection and embodiment. And those people, I think, can be moved more towards a deeper embodiment and social and connectedness through their, because they're mostly in their heads. I'm not saying Brian is, but often I am. Through my mind, I'm actually getting dragged into my heart and my body through mapping and through inquiry, which to me is like, if we can't get those people into the deeper place, we're not ever going to really bridge it. So I'm trying to like pull us from both ends into a place where we can actually talk to each other and start to see things together.
I'm just thinking about collective impact, and at least in the Bay Area, what a influence it has been on organizations and networks, probably, and how limiting it is.
What is
So,
more?
what?
I want to hear more. Like, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Like, is that is a collective impact
Well,
an initiative?
I'm taking it's a sort of model used in leadership around basically measurement, and it's a little more hierarchical. And it's a step better than the command and control types of structures, but not too many steps from that. And it's one that funders recognize and want to see in. So I'm bringing it up because I'm wondering, it's related to what we talked about with Meg Wheatley of creating new systems. And so the sort of trail of breadcrumbs is, I believe that mapping is part of being able to see things in a different way and new systems. And so then we're bumping around in the dark again. What does that, if as practitioners we're using mapping as part of this new ways of working, then of course now I see that mapping and leadership have to be really integrated rather than mapping being a thing. And so that's where you are and where we are. And I guess the conversation this morning is more of what does that look like? So, yeah, so I don't know. So it seems like continuing to challenge ourselves around the mapping and the network horizon question is really important. Although, you know, looking back at projects, no one wants to think about those things. So I don't know how you engage people on the ground. Yeah.
I mean, that's
like Earth Island Institute has projects around the world that are, you know, people doing change, you know, protecting the planet types of things, but they're just trying to offer the support for those projects, but it's sort of like giving people more leadership skills around what funders expect.
Yeah.
So, which is too bad because it was founded by David Brower with a sense of encouraging boldness and
Yeah, right.
sort of being a little outside the norms of projects being able to rub elbows together and do innovative things. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my world. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, that's what, like, I'm trying to figure out how to, like, yeah, like there's all these people doing all this great work but there's this layer of which their work is falling short and they don't want to go to that. Like, how do you like a tag on? It's like everybody's focused on leadership and mapping is like this subspecialty for geeky guys, and it's just like, but I'm in that, like, how do we, and so that's my constant thing is how do we help people see the need for leadership to do mapping, for mapping and leadership to go hand in hand. It doesn't mean the leaders have to be mapping experts, but to be informed by and to refer to, and like making that case is the hardest, is the biggest challenge to me. If you could make that case and you could get people like engaged from the beginning, you could, I think, make some really great maps that could actually make a big difference. Anyway, we're over the half hour. Does anybody have any last words they want to say?
Christine.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, okay. I sent you something through the Slack channel.
Yeah, I saw it. I'll look at it.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. All right, thanks a lot. Just a seed.
Pardon me?
Just a seed.
Yeah, I'll look at it. Yeah,
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
I think I'm leaving with this question around the embodiment. But you shared that for you experience it that, like mental models or knowing things, and then through the map, like working and engaging with a map, it becomes more embodied and like insights and actual experiences. And maybe not everybody just has that by looking at a map. So maybe how can we support that to happen for more people when they look at a map, where it's maybe not just automatically happening for some unknown reason. We all have different patterns in our brains and experiences, right? So that's a question. And also this thing of kind of networks falling short of their potential. I think the falling short is also an embodiment part. There's a lot of theory and ideas about what networks can do and what's possible, but how are networks actually like manifesting and embodying that, like bringing it on the ground? So that's where what I'm leaving with, I think, right now.
Can I just add attention to that? I mean, to me, this is kind of like one of the key things is humans have only 24 hours in a day, and only their brains can only process so many relationships. So partly what we're talking about is like at the network horizon, that's a scale of the work that isn't going to be embodied. I mean, like I can't physically have close relationships with, the 3,000 people who are just outside of my, my universe, but who are in the closest to the network horizon for me. I can't do that. So a map can help me be strategic and see into that space in a way, yes, the Dunbar number, but it can help me see beyond my Dunbar number, not mother, but in a way that if I can also bring my openness and my embodiment into that strategic level, I think it could be magic. But I think a lot of people in networks are sort of talking as if we have to have this personal knowledge of all the people in it, which is powerful, but it's not possible for us to have the personal knowledge at the scale where we can make system change.
There must be another way to like relate and have that embodied, which is not the way that we have related in our like ego part of the network. There must be
Yes.
another way. It's also nature. Like not all animals like know and understand everything about each other, know who they are and what they're doing all day, but it's still all connected and it works beautifully together.
Yes.
So there
Yes.
must be some other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not the separation and silos and
Right.
or I think I know, but I actually don't. But it's also not the like I talk to you every day and that's why I know. Like
Yeah,
there must be
right.
some other way besides these two.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the tension for this work for me that I'm always trying to figure out is like, yes, when we're, that scale thing,
Mhm.
which the network horizon is representing for me. Anyway, this has been a wonderful conversation. Mary, you look like you have something.
Oh, I'm just thinking about the element of time, which is a whole different, added to this, which is a whole different conversation,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Like just a small project I was part of in San Francisco has rippled sort of across the city, but in different ways, but that's sort of invisible. And so I'm wondering about how to see things through time, that horizon, or that's time is part of the horizon,
Yes.
I think.
Yes, I agree.
So I'll
Yeah.
end there. Yeah.
Okay, that was really rich. There's lots for us to
Yes.
cogitate on, ferment.
How are we going to get through the rest of the day? That's what I'm wondering after this conversation.
Yeah,
More bumping in the dark, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, you all.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a
Bye.
good rest of the day. See you all. Yep. Bye.
Bye.